Hey guys, happy Friday. Today I want to talk to you guys about Friday the 13th Part 3, or as it's also known, Friday the 13th 3D. I really wanted to talk about this movie today because my opinion on this one, I feel like it's changed, but it also hasn't at the same time. I guess we'll try to figure out what I mean as we continue on through this video. Let's go back to 2010. It was early 2010, and I remember getting these movies one at a time at FYE. I would get my weekly paycheck from work, and I couldn't wait to head down there to basically pick up whichever entry they had. It's important to note this was during the time of the height of the Friday the 13th Deluxe Edition DVD releases. So they were constantly going out of stock every time I would go. There would be a couple, they'd replenish them, and then people would buy them. And yes, people were buying them. I would go from one Friday to the next, and every time there would be some missing. And it was this one faithful week where I got to pick up Friday the 13th Part 3. My brother was kind of taking this horror journey with me at the same time. I'd get a Friday the 13th and we'd watch it together, and he was having just as much fun as I would. I can't wait to talk about Part 5 soon so I can tell the infamous story of me and him watching that movie and seeing the ending for the first time. Nevertheless, one week we finally get Friday the 13th Part 3, and the guy at the cash register says, "Have you seen this one yet?" And I was like, "No, I'm really excited." He goes, "This is the one where he gets the hockey mask." And I was really excited because I always wondered, how did that begin? What was the start of that? I had really grandiose ideas, and I probably thought that it was going to be a lot more important in the film rather than what actually happens and how he gets the hockey mask. When you think about it, how could I not think that? With an image so iconic, you imagine that the way Jason would have gotten that hockey mask was pretty damn incredible. I'm not saying I don't like it, though. So when we get home and I open up the DVD case, out pours these 3D glasses. I was like, oh, cool, 3D. Now, I had no experience with 3D in the house at this point. So I was thinking to myself, oh, this is going to be incredible. My brother was experimenting at the time with drinking different kinds of beers and things like that. So when he comes home with his old English 40 that he was ready to try to drink, putting on these 3D glasses seemed like such a fun idea to him. We start watching Friday the 13th Part 3. Now, right away, I gotta say, I'll never forget the absolute goosebumps I got. And yes, I got goosebumps when we first heard that disco theme play by the band Hot Ice. Now, I want to say right from the beginning, that disco theme is about as iconic as anything in that entire franchise. Manfredini killed it, and that song is incredible. I love it. It sets the vibe and tone like no other horror track I've ever heard. It puts a smile on your face while also keeping you on edge, realizing something is around the corner. It's the mark of a brilliant horror song. It's important to note too, in my parents' living room, it was a very long living room, so we're sitting on this couch wearing these 3D glasses while my brother is sipping Old English, and all of a sudden, his head starts bobbing a little bit to the left and to the right. At this point, Harold is taking this long stick and pointing it right into the camera as he's trying to fix the laundry. I hear, "Pause it," and all of a sudden my brother runs up, gets up, and goes and throws up in the bathroom. Walks back out and says, "How about we do the 2D version?" So then we watched Friday the 13th Part 3 in its 2D version. We ended up having a great time, and I enjoyed the film a lot. It would be years later that I would realize what it is about Part 3 that I think is very, very special. Looking at the film now, I see that this was during a time where 3D movies were coming back into the fold. This was not a new idea. This was something that was really popular in the 50s, but it got a big foothold again in the early 80s. Friday the 13th Part 3 was one of the biggest films that did this. You also had Amityville 3D, as well as Jaws 3D, Parasite, which was a Charlie Band film. 3D was a thing that was trying to make its comeback. People usually seem to fall on one side or the other. I personally think 3D is really fun, and I would love the opportunity to see more horror films get 3D releases now and be able to experience that. To me, it's just like, okay, this was fun. I had a blast seeing Texas Chainsaw 3D in 3D at the movie theater. I wish they would have kept some movies coming out like that, but it seems to just come and go so fast that as soon as it arrives, it just leaves again. But I think when you talk to people about Friday the 13th Part 3, they never really talk about the 3D aspect of it. And honestly, I think over the years, that's become more of a good thing than a bad thing. You could certainly look at other horror films that have big 3D elements to them, and when that's the focal point of the conversation, I don't know that that's necessarily a positive instead of a negative. If that were a talking point for the majority of people today, I feel like that would supersede the good stuff that I think the film really has. When you look at Jason in the Friday the 13th franchise, I've been on record saying this, and I still feel this today. Part 3 is the scariest Jason in the whole series to me. Now, I can listen to all the arguments and hear other people's opinions about how Part 4 is a better Jason, how Kane Hodder is the best Jason, and that's all well and fine. But what I love about Richard Brooker, and I know that there's a dedicated fan base for his Jason, is he's almost like a ghost. I feel like his presence in the film is supernatural. I never saw in this exact sort of light ever again in the series. And that's one of the things I love about the Friday the 13th franchise, the individuality of each entry. And when I watch Part 3, I always have the biggest smile seeing Richard Brooker's Jason in here. It's just my absolute favorite. He has this really gnarly hunchback appearance and these broad shoulders that look like he could just maul right through any human being. I feel like Friday the 13th Part 3 is that perfect blend of the slasher film at that time. They have all these individualistic characters with different personalities, but I appreciate how they raise the stakes with having pregnant people in the film, and, you know, some people could say that's a little harsh to be killing a pregnant woman, but as long as it's entertainment and it's not real, I say do whatever the hell you want. Another thing about the 3D effects in here, there are some kills where eyes pop out and things of that nature, and you see a kill from under the floorboard. I feel like watching those kills in 2D are actually as good as seeing them in 3D now. It has the same effect of just watching a great practical effect. Is it hokey? Yeah, but at the same time, it's still practical, and that's really cool. I could appreciate that. Now, there is a scene in this movie that I almost thought not to even comment on, but I just figured, what the hell? Now, there is a scene in this movie that insinuates Jason did not want to just kill this poor woman, but to do other bad things to her. Now, a lot of Friday the 13th fans would say this is a really stupid scene and they shouldn't have done it. And while I can also agree with that, being that Freddy Krueger is my favorite character and knowing the nature of his evilness, I feel it would be silly of me to rag on this scene. Is it unnecessary? It absolutely is. If they took this scene out, would it change the movie's perception? I don't think so. But does it really bother me at this point? It just is what it is. I talked about how Friday the 13th Part 2 has this identity to Part 1, but after this is where each Friday the 13th starts to have its own individualistic feel. Now, that is a positive just in the same way that I feel like Part 2 being connected to Part 1 is such a positive. Part 3 has a unique feel and a certain cadence that is never seen this way again. When I think of Friday the 13th Part 3, it is the ghostly, creepy, Jason. This is during the Friday the 13th series where I feel that Jason is just as much a threat to the audience as he is to the characters in the film. If somebody tells you their favorite Jason is one of the zombie-era Jasons, I feel like they like to see a little bit behind the curtain with their Jason. Perhaps seeing that Jason look at a hockey billboard sign, or seeing that Jason look at his handiwork after he just chopped off 3 or 4 people's heads holding an arm in his hand. I love that too, but I think my favorite era of Jason is that human mongoloid Jason. That's the Jason that you as a viewer still can't trust. There are moments in Part 3 where I just look and say, damn, I'm so glad I'm not in this Camp Crystal Lake right now. Or seeing him from a distance when the girl's in the water trying to get the wallet. You never feel like you're a part of Jason's story like you do in the latter sequels. It's different, but I think I just prefer it that way. If they ever do a new Friday the 13th, I'd like to go back to that style of Jason. Feeling like we, the audience, can't trust Jason as much as the characters in the film. There's an interesting thing about Part 3 that I'll always kind of wish we could have gotten. A scene that we seen images of, but never the footage. It's an alternate look of Jason, where his face is less mongoloidy, but more of this otherworldly creature. There's this crazy shot of him cutting off the girl's head, and the look of that Jason just looks so intense. I can't imagine what that character would have been like. But the only thing when I think about that is I feel like that Jason would have acted different than the Jason we got in the actual film. That's neither here or there, I guess, since we'll never see. But I always adored that look. If I ever get another Part 3 bust, I'd get one based off of that look of Jason. Is Part 3 the best in the series? I don't think it is. But there's something interesting about Part 3. Sometimes when I marathon these movies, I'll just start with Part 3. Even though I love 1 and 2 so much, to a lot of Friday the 13th fans, I feel like this is the one that they might do the same thing with. Being that this is the first film that has Jason's hockey mask, or being that it's got the first Friday the 13th feel that we would start to know and love, the seeds were definitely planted in this film to carry us forward with certain flavors and identifiable markers that you would see in every Friday the 13th sequel after this. The last thing I want to talk about is what I consider to be one of the best ending shots in the entire franchise of Friday the 13th. In the end of Part 3, when you see that image of Jason hissing out of the window with blood all over his face, and you see him busting out of the front door and hauling ass. That is a shot that will always be like, oh my god. I don't see how anybody could not be freaked out by that thing running full speed ahead at you. And I actually do appreciate the homage to seeing an old dead Pamela Voorhees coming out of the water and pulling Chrissy down. Sometimes fanfare works, and in my opinion, I think that one did pretty well. From the iconic poster of Friday the 13th Part 3 to Jason's incredible look with the new hockey mask he had in this film, I think Part 3 is about as legendary as an 80s horror film can get. The film has merits that way supersede the idea that this was a 3D movie, has really helped it in the long run. I don't think you can say the same with a lot of the other 80s 3D horror movies that came out. How do you feel about Friday the 13th Part 3? Has that been an entry that you've continued to revisit over the years and held in high regard? Or is it not really the kind of entry that you think of when Friday the 13th comes to mind? Whenever somebody brings up Part 3 to me, I have really great memories of my brother gagging, drinking Old English 40s, trying to watch it in 3D, realizing how great the music is in this one, the funny characters, and how creepy that Jason is. I'll always be a really big Part 3 fan. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video. It's your old pal CHH, and Friday the 13th will always have a home on this channel. Huge giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.